Could the Oklahoma City Thunder actually get LeBron James? No. Okay, I guess technically there is a chance, so let's talk about it. Yo, what is up, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video. A lot of y'all, or hell, probably even most of you, are very, very confused about what I'm talking about, why this video exists, what are we doing here? Let me go through. Let me start back from the beginning. This past All-Star weekend, LeBron James answered a lot of questions. He was available for the All-Star Game media availability and also talking a little bit about the NBA 75. And so through all of that, LeBron James, he was asked a lot to both reflect on his career in the past, talk about what things are like right now for the Lakers and going forward. And throughout all of that, a lot of question marks were raised about LeBron James's future, including the fact that he didn't seem super committal to the Lakers going forward in the next few seasons. There have been a lot of questions rising up about, like, is LeBron James going to jump ship soon because Anthony Davis is becoming more and more injury prone? The Russell Westbrook situation isn't really working out. There's rumors that he's unhappy that they didn't make any moves at the deadline. And so people were already kind of starting to question things. And then one of the only things LeBron James concretely said about his future was that he wants to play with his son, Bronny James. Whether that be his last season, his second to last season, he just wants to play with his son, Bronny James, at some point. And so that got people thinking a lot about, oh, where will Bronny James end up? Could LeBron James end up in some super weird situation and end up trying to play with his son in that weird situation? And so a lot of people started thinking Oklahoma City, mainly because of all of our draft picks, but also because of a quote that he had. He was asked about Josh Giddey in particular. They asked him, what does he think about Josh Giddey's game, like his future in the league? And he basically just said that Josh Giddey was pretty good. But what he really said was that the MVP over in Oklahoma City is Sam Presti. He said that Sam Presti has a great eye for talent, drafting guys, of course, like Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook. He mentioned Reggie Jackson by name. Didn't mention James Harden, but I'm sure he just forgot. And so that kind of praise on him, matched with the fact that the Thunder have a lot of picks, got a lot of people thinking that maybe that was a shot at the Lakers general management because they didn't make any moves. Maybe he kind of respects Sam Presti. And so with all of these things combined, some Thunder fans decided he's going to end up here. And to be honest with you, it's just not gonna happen, but it's a fun situation to maybe think about a little bit. So let's talk about the possibility of it. Of course, the main thing that it comes down to is, when does Bronny James enter the NBA? And right now he's slated to enter in 2024, assuming he goes one and done, which is definitely a possibility. If he does go one and done in college, then he will be in the 2024 NBA draft. The next question is, how good of a player is Bronny James? And he is good. He's not just LeBron James' son. He is his own player. And I believe right now he's ranked in the low 40s, around 43 or 45, in terms of being a prospect. He's like the 43rd, 44th ranked prospect coming out of his high school class. So if that all stays true, he's projected to be right around the early second round. And so that kind of gives us a nice window of where he could be drafted. And so let's look at the Thunder's draft picks. The Thunder in 2024 have our own first round pick. We have the Houston Rockets pick, top 4 protected. We have the Clippers pick, unprotected. The Jazz pick, top 10 protected. Our own second round pick, the Charlotte Hornets second round pick, and the Minnesota Timberwolves second round pick. So that is, if you're counting at home, 7 draft picks in the 2024 NBA draft, when Bronny James will supposedly be in the draft. There's always a possibility he stays longer and goes to 2025, but for the sake of simplicity, we're going to go with 2024. So if he enters that draft, the Thunder will have 7, if not even more, because of like some protections and stuff, and there's always time to get more picks, at least 7 chances to draft Bronny James, and that's a lot of picks. That's over a 10th of the picks in the entire draft. And so if you think like, oh, you could bring in LeBron James and Bronny James for the price of 1 pick, why not just throw a pick out there and draft him? Get LeBron James to come here, join a young core of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Josh Giddey, Lou Dort, assuming all those guys are still there in 2024, join that young core and, try and go for a championship or something like that, playing alongside your son. It makes sense. And I think it could work. You bring in the two of them, assuming LeBron really is that committed enough to go to Oklahoma City, leaving Los Angeles, or Cleveland, assuming maybe he goes back there at some point, because it kind of seems like, from the way he was really hyping up the Cleveland crowd and going for it at the All-Star weekend in Cleveland, it seems like he wants to end up back there at some point, whether it's after he plays with his son or before. Whatever, assuming you can lure LeBron James to Oklahoma City, it's a very valid possibility. But then you have to think about the fact that all 30 NBA teams are going to be thinking that exact same thing. And so now begs the question of, where does Bronny James get drafted? Because if we go by just the prospect ranking, he's probably going to be there in the early second round, where the Thunder could very easily take him, whether they trade multiple second round picks up for him, they draft him with one of those 4 first round picks. There's a very real possibility they could go out and draft Bronny James. But all the teams are going to be thinking that. Assuming LeBron James is still good, we're not going to assume he's like an MVP caliber player. Assuming he's still like a top 50 player in the league at age 40, which is how old he will be at this point, how many teams are going to go out there and look at their team and go, we would love to bring in a player like LeBron James, maybe even just for revenue purposes to like get people to come out and see the team play with the LeBron James potential retirement tour, but say they want to bring him in for like a championship. What's to stop a team from just saying, okay, we'll just draft Bronny James, get LeBron James to come here and become a champion? It's very possible. And so now Bronny James could get drafted even higher. What if he plays better than that? And now maybe there's conversations of, could Bronny James be a top 15 pick purely because teams want to not only bring him in, but bring in LeBron James? So it's an interesting case of how will it raise his draft stock? And so then it becomes the point of, if you are a team like the Oklahoma City Thunder, assuming at this point in 2024, and in 2024, I'm hopeful that the Thunder are going to be a playoff team. So one of those picks, assume like one of the Rockets, Clippers, or Jazz pick, assume one of them's good, at least top 15. Are you willing to spend a top 15 pick on Bronny James, who, if things progress the current way that they are, is supposed to be like a second round pick? Are you willing to spend that on a guy to get LeBron James? And so that's the big question. And I'm kind of curious as to what y'all are thinking about this, because looking at it just from a pure like asset standpoint, the Thunder have the draft picks. We can spend a draft pick and just throw it away. Maybe not even throw it away, because I do think Bronny James could be good. He is LeBron James' son, and he's a decent player in his own right. And bringing in a guy like LeBron James, even if he's not that great, he's still a great mentor and probably a great presence to bring in. So assuming all of that is the case, like where are you as the viewer willing to draft him? Where do you do it? And if Sam Presti looks at it and goes, yeah, we're willing to throw away a pick because we've got 1 million of them, he could theoretically end up here. But the possibility of that happening because of all the situations that kind of could send it off track, I don't think it happens. Of course, Sam Presti's number one goal is to win a championship, and bringing in that kind of like extra media attention with LeBron James, Bronny James Jr., I don't think that's something Sam Presti would really do. It doesn't really seem like it's up his alley. In addition, Oklahoma City is just not a place I'm sure that LeBron James is going to want to play. I'm sure that he would rather play with his son in like Cleveland, LA, New York, something like that, something outside of Oklahoma City. So I wouldn't be surprised if that factors into things. Maybe LeBron James, if Bronny ends up at OKC, is even like, yeah, I don't know about playing with him right now. So that's a whole situation. And of course, the fact that all 30 NBA teams could be thinking the exact same thing, all of those things make it pretty unlikely that LeBron James is going to end up in OKC. But is it possible? Yeah, it is. Say Bronny James goes out and he really is a really good player. He ends up being like a top 15 player in the draft. And the Thunder, with 4 first-round picks, could very realistically have 1, if not 2, if not 3 top 15 picks in that draft. You go out and you either trade up and get him just to be a great player to add to this team. LeBron James sees not only Bronny James, but a young core that is growing and could help him compete for a championship one last time maybe, and try and win it with his son too. It's possible. Is it likely? No. But it is fun to think about. So that's my thoughts on this whole thing. Let me know what you think about this whole situation. Do you think Bronny James could end up in Oklahoma City with LeBron James? Do you think it's actually possible? I think it's possible. I just think it's super unlikely with all of the issues that I mentioned before. If your favorite team, where would you be willing to draft? Like, how far up would you be willing to spend a pick for Bronny James and a 40-year-old LeBron James? And that really is another big question, is how good is LeBron James at age 40? Is he still a top 50 player, top 60 player? Has he kind of fallen off a lot? Now he's just kind of like a solid role player. And even then, does his mentorship mean a lot for a young team that's trying to learn and compete for a championship? For a contender, does bringing in that experienced veteran, one of the greatest players of all time in LeBron James, does that warrant you trading up in a draft to get a pick to bring him in alongside Bronny? All of those questions are up in the air, and I'm just super curious as to what y'all think about this, because I think it's super fun to think about. And then, once again, always the situation of maybe even Bronny James doesn't even go in the 2024 draft, the 2025 draft, or the 2026 draft, and all this doesn't mean anything, but I thought it was kind of a fun thought experiment, so let me know in the comment section below what you think about this whole thing. Where do you think LeBron James and Bronny James will end up in the future? I appreciate y'all watching. Make sure to like and subscribe. I'll see y'all later. Real One Say Back.